Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really heavy but absolutely vital piece of history, the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to break down exactly how this system worked, look at its immense human cost, and ultimately explore the profound moral lessons it leaves us with today. My goal here is to help you truly grasp not just the raw facts of what happened, but the why and the how behind this entire era.
But before we get into the cold economics of a system that quite literally treated human beings as cargo, let's ground ourselves first. Think about this fundamental baseline of human empathy and morality found in Luke 6:31, do to others as you would have them do to you. I want you to just keep that simple, powerful principle in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer, because measuring history against that specific standard is going to frame everything we talk about today.
So, here's our roadmap. We'll start by mapping out the triangular trade network. Then we'll break down the 3 points of trade, confront the harsh reality of the Middle Passage, examine the economics of slavery, and finally conclude with a crucial lesson on education, morality, and peace.
All right, Section 1, the triangular trade network as a global system. To really get our heads around this, we need to zoom out and look at the vast geography involved. The triangular trade was this massive, brutal network connecting 3 very different parts of the globe: Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and it operated in a continuous, devastating cycle. We have to remember, this system didn't just move goods around, it forcibly moved millions of people. And while this trade definitely fueled global economies and created immense wealth for some, the consequences were just devastating. We're talking about entire cultures disrupted, families completely torn apart, and generations subjected to the absolute horrors of slavery.
Moving right along to Section 2, 3 points of trade. How exactly did this operate?
To really understand the mechanics here, we have to ask, what exactly were these 3 points of the triangular trade? How did this cycle actually function on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it worked in 3 very distinct steps. Step 1, manufactured goods were shipped from Europe straight down to Africa. Step 2, in exchange for those goods, enslaved Africans were taken and forcibly transported across the ocean to the Americas. And then Step 3, the American raw materials and cash crops, which, remember, were produced by that enslaved labor, were shipped all the way back to Europe. These ships were basically never empty. They just continuously cycled through these 3 points, generating wealth at every single stop, entirely at the expense of human life.
Let's move into Section 3, surviving the Middle Passage and the human toll. It's time to shift our focus away from the cold mechanics of the global map and look at the horrific personal reality of this journey.
The Middle Passage was that middle leg of the journey, the route from Africa to the Americas, and it was, in every sense of the word, horrific. Enslaved people were packed into the dark holds of ships, facing unimaginable overcrowding. Disease just ran rampant in these confined spaces. The conditions were completely inhumane. It was a system built on treating people not as human beings, but simply as commodities to be transported.
15%. Now, that number is not just a passing statistic. It represents the absolute minimum mortality rate for the human beings trapped on these deadly ships. Just think about that. Because of the extreme overcrowding and disease, more than 15% of the enslaved people forced onto these vessels never even made it to the Americas. They perished during the journey. It's a staggering, heartbreaking number that really forces us to confront the true brutality of what happened.
Now for Section 4, the economics of slavery. Why did this happen? We really have to ask the difficult questions about why this system was created in the first place and why it lasted in the United States all the way into the early 1800s.
Let's investigate the demand side of things. Why was the slave trade so insanely profitable for plantation owners? What was the actual financial incentive keeping this brutal engine running?
Honestly, the entire system was driven by profit. The Americas were developing these massive plantation economies, and those plantations required a ton of labor. The slave trade provided that cheap, forced labor, which then fueled the mass growth of cash crops meant for export back to Europe. This output massively enriched American landowners and, at the same time, boosted profits for the transatlantic traders organizing the voyages. It was a vicious economic loop where human suffering was the direct input for tremendous financial gain.
But there was fierce resistance. When we look at the core humanitarian argument against the trade, it comes right back down to what we started with today. Treating humans as property violates basic empathy. It is fundamentally opposed to the idea of treating others as you would want to be treated. And it was exactly this moral outcry that eventually helped dismantle the system, which perfectly bridges the gap to our concluding section.
Finally, Section 5, Education, Morality, and Peace. This is where we look at the godly learner's philosophy and synthesize these hard historical facts with a broader perspective.
History shows us pretty clearly what happens when education operates without biblical morality. I mean, the people running the triangular trade were often highly educated in things like economics, navigation, and agriculture, but without morality, that education just led to terrible choices that caused lasting generational hurt. Because what is the point of being smart and educated if you use that knowledge to build systems of suffering? Conversely, as Romans 8 points out, keeping a spiritual mind brings true peace. Merging your education with a strong moral compass ensures that your knowledge is actually used to uplift people rather than destroy them.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought for today's explainer. You are gaining an education right now by learning this history. But as you gain this knowledge, how are you going to choose to apply your moral compass? Will you use your education to heal the world or repeat the tragic mistakes of its history? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this vital topic, and I really hope this helps you think deeply about both our past and your future.